Planet Express has new neighbors. A family from Cygnus 5 has moved in across the street and opened a pizzeria. The crew go to welcome them to Earth, only to find that, well, the Cygnoids are friendly, lovely people. They're completely ignorant of Earth's custom and human food, and their pizza is completely inedible. Fry uses his knowledge gained from his old job at a traditional 20th century pizzeria to help them, and it goes well. Eventually, it's suggested that the Cygnoids learn about Earth's favorite pastime, Blurns Ball. Everyone goes to the park for a friendly game, but things quickly turn sour when Leela's lack of depth perception causes her pitches to hit the opposing batters in the head, causing serious injury. She apologizes profusely, but the game is witnessed by one Abner Doubledeal, the owner of the worst professional Blurns Ball team in the league, the New York Mets. He explains that a one-eyed woman repeatedly beating batters would make a hell of a novelty act, so he offers Leela a job as the first female Blurns Baller. Leela's recruitment proves a smashing success, drawing crowds the size of which the Mets haven't seen in ages, and Leela becomes a hero to girls everywhere who dream of growing up and hurting men for a living. She's on cloud 9 until she meets minor league player Jackie Anderson, who informs Leela that her little comedy show is making it impossible for female athletes to be taken seriously. Leela's spirits are then further crushed when she learns that she's on track to becoming the worst Blurns Ball player of all time. This prospect frustrates the current worst player of all time, Hank Aaron the 24th, who wants nothing more than to keep his title. The younger Hank offers to help train Leela so she can become a better player, just mildly better than him. And after taking his advice to keep her eye off the ball, she successfully throws her first strike. Meanwhile, the Cygnoids find their pizzeria growing in notoriety, spurred on by their signature dish, Leela's Bean Pizza. In fact, their success becomes great enough to attract the eye of a fast food tycoon who buys their franchise for a significant amount of money. Soon, the final Blurns Ball game of the season arrives. It's the bottom of the ninth with 2 outs. The Mets lead for once, but to everyone's worry, Leela is forced to take the mound. The batter she faces, one Jackie Anderson, making her professional debut as the second female Blurns Ball player. Keeping her eye off the ball, Leela throws a pitch. Strike 1. Another. Strike 2. It's the final pitch, and it comes down to this. Leela winds up, looks away, and throws with all the force she can muster. And Jackie Anderson hits the ball with equal force. It's a grand slam. The Mets have lost, but so begins the illustrious career of the second female Blurns Baller. Leela leaves dejected, but is stopped by Jackie, who offers reassurance. Sure, she may go down in history as the worst player of all time, but in doing so, she will encourage women the world over to try harder than ever to prove that they aren't as terrible as she is. In the end, Leela did in fact make a difference. Welcome to Space Podcast 3000, where the future is in the past.
So this one,
It's a thing.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
I mean, I like the title. You know, it's a play on A League of Their Own, a movie about the real-life women's baseball league from the 40s, which, good movie. Kind of wish I was watching that.
It's a cute enough episode. It has a funny enough premise, like the idea that they're able to break through the thing of women in sports, where it's like the fact that it took 3,000 years for the whole thing anyway, but
well,
it's like
for Blurns Ball, not baseball.
Exactly, yeah, because it's not the same as baseball, but but of course she couldn't have come out as like a legitimately good player. She comes out and they parade her around as a freak, as an attraction to get people to view it, which really is what they are trying to. Hang on, I got the fucking. There's a siren going by, so I couldn't say anything on my end. Which was the kind of thing where that baseball or Blurns Ball, they really do care about the money. That really is kind of the deciding factor in a lot of these things, or whether a team even stays around. If there's no money in it, then they don't bother doing this sort of stuff. Which really is the entire premise. Like they want her on there as an attraction. They get people to come to the parks and buy food and buy tickets and stuff.
Well, what I have to wonder is maybe the plot of this episode was inspired by Eddie Gaedel, who was a little person signed to the St. Louis Browns for one season in the early 50s as a publicity stunt.
I'm sure there's other parallels to that sort of thing, but I would not be surprised.
Well, fun fact, Gaedel's number was 1/8.
Oh, God.
Yes.
Really? That seems a bit too obvious. I mean, you think it'd be like 1/2 or something like that.
I mean, it's true. His uniform is on display at the Baseball Hall of Fame. Although, yeah, the idea of Leela being the first female professional ball player does feel like a bit of a stretch to me. Like, are you seriously trying to tell me that sports are still segregated by gender in the year 3002?
Apparently they are.
I do like the joke that all the whole numbers have been retired. That really makes sense because, yeah, that would happen eventually. You get enough famous ball players, like, yeah, you would eventually run out.
Well, except there's an infinite number of integers.
Yes, exactly.
But don't the numbers go up to don't the numbers only go up to like 99 though?
I'm not sure. I mean, I guess there's only so many digits you can really fit on a uniform, but
yeah. Because the other joke would be that they have numbers that go all the they have like numbers that are 8 digits long, which that could be funny too.
Yeah, but also like different teams have retire different numbers, so that's something to bear in mind. But it is a good joke. But like again, the whole thing with gender segregated sports. So the only reason that women's sports exists as a separate thing is to protect men's egos. That like most guys, particularly like male athletes, they don't want the supposed humiliation of losing to a girl, which I don't get why.
Which again, that leads into the whole toxic masculinity thing. It's like if you play against a girl, you're fucked because if you beat her, you beat a girl. But if she beats you, you got beaten by a girl. There's really no way of winning.
Well, it really mainly is just the not wanting to lose. Like you have the story of Jackie Mitchell, the woman who allegedly struck out both Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig in one day. At the time, players and sports writers did claim it was staged, but I have to wonder how much of that was a male ego thing, much like the Cleopatra stuff from last time, just saying, like, no, she couldn't possibly do it on her own merits. It must have been staged. I mean, there's no way to know for sure, but, like, that is the vibe I get from it. But then, like, there's also that incident from a couple of years ago with cyclist Nicole Hanselman, who was in a prestigious race in Belgium. And so the women's race started 10 minutes after the men's so that they could be positioned a ways behind. But then Hanselman got so far ahead of the pack that she actually caught up to the men's race. And officials literally forced her to stop for 7 minutes to fall back behind. And she ended up finishing 74th because they threw off her rhythm and, she couldn't properly get back into it. And, like, they claimed it was for safety reasons, but I genuinely believe that it had nothing to do with that and that it really was just to protect the egos of the male racers, having this woman who not only started 10 minutes behind them, but managed to catch up to them and might have even passed them if she hadn't been stopped.
Right, that makes sense, but that does kind of lead into what really makes me appreciate the joke in this episode, which he really does sum up at the end, is that being a bum knows no gender. It's like, yeah, you can play in a sport and suck at it, but it's like the whole idea of like she's the first woman and she's amazing at it. It's like, no, she's the first woman and she sucks at it. But like that should be a thing that anybody can do. You can play something and suck at it, and it should have nothing to do with your gender. Being a bum knows no gender. That I like that as a phrase. That's a funny phrase, but it also has a neat message behind it.
It is, and I wish more people believed that, because there is this whole idea of the model minority, where so many people, even if they won't admit it, even if they don't believe that they are this way, they will only respect a marginalized group, whether it's women or ethnic minorities or trans people or whoever, if they're like perfect and excellent, and like they always try to defend us by saying like, oh, look at these examples, they're amazing, they're fantastic.
Like, why can't you be more like that person?
Well, yeah, it's like, well, what about the rest of us who don't excel in that same way? We shouldn't have to excel to be worthy of respect.
Which can be true for anybody. It's like you're worthy of respect even if you suck at everything, but it's like, because that leads into the whole, like, what can you do for society? It's like, because if you can't do anything for society, why should they care about you?
Yeah, because like that's the problem, especially because like white men are allowed to be mediocre. Nobody blinks twice if a white man is mediocre. But if you're not a white man, again, if you're a woman or black or, East Asian or whatever, or you're trans, or gay, or really anything that isn't just a white man, you are not allowed to be mediocre. You're held to a higher standard, or else it's like, oh, you're just the diversity hire, or, other bullshit. And it is so exhausting because you have to always be perfect. Every one of us is expected to be a representative of our community. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not really.
Well,
you're talking about white men, and I'm
man.
like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, fair, TZ, fair, you wouldn't, but it is just...
No, I mean, I'm certainly a member of a certain minority. I'm a member of the geeks minority and shit. It's like I was not into sports, and that was my source of thing. I was the overweight geek that liked to make video games.
TZ, I realize you were largely joking here, but come on.
Come on. You have to think about what minority you belong to so that you can agree that you are also marginalized. Everybody's marginalized in some way. Just some are just much more marginalized than others.
I don't know if that's exactly true.
I don't have the wherewithal at the moment to really argue with that, but I'm sure someone would. I don't want to get into this right now. I like how they brought back the commissioner of the Ultimate Robot Fighting League for this, as the owner of the Mets now, and he has a name now, so that's neat.
Not that I remember his name.
Abner Doubledeal, which is probably a reference to Abner Doubleday, the alleged inventor of modern baseball, which has been thoroughly debunked.
There was a really, I like the fourth wall joke in this with the black bar generator. That had me laughing at that one. They walk around, they got their junk sensor, then Bender knocks it out.
That was the one good joke in the episode. That was the only good joke in this episode. Although I still think Scott Pilgrim did this joke better.
How are you doing that with your mouth?
I think that's a better execution of this same joke, but, that's what we're working with in this episode.
So yeah, you weren't a terribly big fan of this one.
I was not impressed.
This was, honestly, the way you two talked it down, I think this episode was better than I expected going in.
I mean, there's definitely worse, but I did not enjoy it very much. It just wasn't funny. It just wasn't funny. So during the original run, before the Comedy Central seasons, this, from what I've read, this was widely considered one of, if not the worst episode of the show, and I can kind of see why. It's just barely any of the jokes land. It's not very good, and the plot makes me sad. Just poor Leela. I feel really bad for her. She can't catch a break.
Right, which, I mean, she kind of has a lot of stuff going for her. She's a ship captain,
She doesn't really get to show any of that off in this episode, though. This episode is just she's pathetic.
But when has she shown any interest in playing Blurnsball to begin with? I
mean, I guess that's fair.
She is really very much out of her element.
But still, she's kind of a punching bag for this episode, and that's really rough. Especially for Leela.
Yeah, it's depressing, especially since, she sets herself a goal, and she ultimately just completely fails. She botches it.
She fails to not be the worst Blurnsball player, which that seems funny to me that they actually have the worst player in history in not even just having the real person there, but having an exhibit to the worst player in history. Who would the worst baseball player in history be? You'd think you wouldn't even know his name because he's so unremarkable. But even that is kind of worthy of note. So there's really that ironic thing where it's by being unremarkable, it actually becomes remarkable.
Fair enough. I do like some of the stuff in the Blurnsball Hall of Fame, though, where the players who broke the various color barriers, green, orange, blue, the half black, half white alien from that one episode of Star Trek about racism. I lied. There was a second joke in this episode that I kind of like. The Hank Aaron, the 24th's Braves uniform having a trident instead of a tomahawk, which I think has got to be a subtle reference to Atlanta being underwater.
Or the fact that they had to get rid of the idea of the Braves logo.
I mean, that would have been years later, though. By this point.
I liked the joke of the first ball hit into orbit. It's like, that's not even a joke. Given the setting of Futurama, that sort of thing would be possible, I think. And that would be legitimately impressive. I think that would actually be worth saving. The first ball hit into orbit.
And actually, speaking of, like, history of this stuff, I really appreciate Jackie Anderson. Having this other character who is, this African-American woman who comes after Leela and ends up being a lot better than her. The first, like, real, quote-unquote, real female Blumenspall player. Because, clearly doing a riff on Jackie Robinson, the first African-American pro baseball player. And one thing I noticed on this rewatch that I never did before is you can see her in the stands during Leela's first game, watching and initially cheering. Like, she's the one who's saying, throw like a girl.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can see her be really enthusiastic about, getting to see the first woman player. And then the next time she shows up, she's really disappointed because, yeah, I would be too.
Yeah, I think there's a bit more going on in this episode than people would call it, like, the worst one, which, I mean, there's certainly a theme behind it that you can read into, but, like I said, the whole episode itself really is not terribly funny. I'm sure it is not strengthened by the fact that it is very much sports related. Although even the names and things they drop are things that pretty much anybody would know, even if you don't follow sports.
Yeah, even like the background gags that aren't necessarily sports related, like the Cavern on the Green, which, I mean, obvious reference to the Tavern on the Green, that real life, highly acclaimed restaurant in Central Park.
Which shut down recently.
No, it reopened, I think.
Oh, okay then, that's good. But yeah, the Cavern on the Green does come back several times. in the series.
Yeah, I remember it was a fixture in a later episode, a whole plot point. But, like, I would not call this episode the worst in the series. It just, it doesn't really have a lot going for it. It's just kind of bleh. It's very dull. It's not one I would want to watch again, frankly. And that's almost worse,
It's almost.
Like, if it was offensively terrible, at least I would have something to talk about.
Right.
I'm just sitting here rattling off trivia because what else do I even say?
Yeah, the plot of this is very much kind of like a mid-season Simpsons episode, where kind of something happens that leads to something else, and that leads to something else, and that eventually leads to the premise of the episode. Which, I mean, you look at that, like, I did kind of like the subplot of the family pizza.
Okay, you know what? I'm going to come out and say it. That should have been the A-plot of the episode.
Really?
The episode should have been about the Planet Express crew getting to know their new alien immigrant neighbors, and, they could have done a lot of neat fish out of water gags and, cultural miscommunications and helping them with their pizzeria and, that whole business. That would have been a more interesting, more fun episode, I think.
You say the only good joke. I like the joke about the chairs. That was a good, because then of course you see them using it and they just turn it to the side. It's just like this little subtle touch. It's a good visual gag. There were a lot of like really subtle jokes in this that I liked. I think I liked this episode more than either of you did, honestly.
There were some jokes in here that were like, fine, that's amusing, but nothing that really made me laugh out loud,
You've tried the best. Now we're open.
I don't know, man. I just didn't care for it. And we're repeating ourselves here because there's just so little to say. Anyway, I think I'm going to go order a pizza.
Get asbestos on it.
I was thinking guano.
Thank you for listening to Space Podcast 3000. Your three voices of the future are Nova Altman, Doug Hancox, and Eden Valerie. The theme music is Voxel Revolution by Kevin MacLeod. You can support the show and listen to new episodes a full week early at patreon.com/spacepod3k. Follow us on Twitter at spacepod3k. Be sure to join us next time as the Planet Express crew mourn the death of a friend in A Pharaoh to Remember.